talking about that you may or you may not have heard much about. And the title of the message is, Have You Ever Heard or Have You Ever Met Sanballat? Now, most of you would know a name like that, and I'm sure if you ever had met a guy named Sanballat, you would remember him. But I will suggest to you that we probably all have met this fella. And where he comes up in the Bible is back in Nehemiah. And to give you a little background information, the time of Nehemiah and Ezra is in the time of the exile of the Jews. They had sinned against God. God had warned them that they should straighten up, but they did not. And frankly, because they didn't, they found themselves in exile in Babylon, and their homeland in Jerusalem was overrun and conquered. Now, many of the folks were left, but some were taken away. One of them was a Nehemiah, and we're going to start reading in Nehemiah 4, chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. And it says, Now when Sanballat heard that they were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and the army of Samaria, What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it from themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive stones out of the heaps of rubbish, their burned ones, at that? And I'm going to stop right there, because what had happened is when Jerusalem was sacked, the Babylonians literally burnt the buildings and temple to the ground. And as any of you have ever had a rock foundation and know what fire does, the rocks become brittle. And what Sanballat is saying is, you've come back to build a broken city with broken rocks. It's not possible. But continuing on verse 3, he says, Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, Yes, what they are doing, or what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back the taunts on their own heads, and give them to be plundered in the land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let their sin not be blotted out from your sight. For they have provoked you in anger and the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and all the walls were joined together to half of its height, and the people had a mind to work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites saw the Ashdodites heard of repairing of the wall of Jerusalem was going forward, and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion. And we prayed to our God and set a guard on protection against them day and night. So here's Nehemiah. He gets a pass from the king to come back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem because it's in a ruin. And he is immediately met by opposition. Now, Sanballat is the governor of the area set up by the Babylonians. He is most likely a Samaritan, and such, they didn't get along with the Jews very well. Sanballat himself had actually taken up residence in the temple because it was in ruins, and it was probably one of the nicer buildings left. And seeing these Jews come back and try to reclaim Jerusalem was not something he wanted. And as you read, he didn't do a good job of helping them out. In fact, he did everything possible to discourage them. If you read on in chapter 4, you find that he not only threatened their lives to the point where they had to carry stones in one hand and a sword in the other. They literally were on guard 24 hours a day because of people wanting to attack them. And when that didn't work, Sanballat started to try to make meetings with Nehemiah. He says, hey, let's have a conference. Let's meet over coffee. Let's do this. Let's do that. And the hilarious part is, Sanballats of the world will find a way to distract you from doing God's work. If it's not by threats, it'll be by laughing at you. If it's not by laughing at you, it'll be by confusing you or making you doubt, or maybe just tying you up in time. But Nehemiah would have none of that. And in fact, if you look at Nehemiah and all the stories that he did, he was never once distracted by Sanballat or Tobiah. And to be honest with you, that's no small thing, because these men were very much certain they were going to keep these walls from being built. And they failed, because Nehemiah had a focus on God that he would not let be distracted. It reminds me of a fellow who said that he bought some self-improvement tapes to how to handle disappointment. And he got home and opened the box hoping to get some inspiration, only to find the box was empty. And I guess, in a way, he learned how to handle disappointment in that. Life is full of disappointments, by the way. In fact, if you haven't been disappointed this week, look out, it's coming. Something is going to go wrong. Something is not going to go the way you planned. Something is going to throw a wrench into everything that you're doing. And it's going to seem like it was very intentional. And to some degree, I will say it is. Satan loves to undermine the people of God. Satan loves to take and distract people from doing what God has called them to do. John 16, verse 33 says, I have these things to you, that you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. What God is saying is, as long as you are alive on this world, things are not going to go the way you planned. You will have this plan, and you will say it's all locked in, it's going to go the right way, and immediately it's going to fall apart. And that is discouraging. Unfortunately, it's also very common. Like I said, if you haven't experienced this, trust me, you will. If you haven't had a plan come unwound, then it's going to happen soon. But I suspect that there's very few people sitting here today that have not experienced this in their lives numerous times. There are many, many times in our lives where we have to deal with disappointment, distraction, and discouragement. And I will tell you, if you let it, it can take you away from God and trusting Him. I've always made the comment at Bible study, and it's a statement I love to make because it's true. The world is a mess, and it's going to get worse. Just that simple. I can't promise you anything else. But I've read the last chapter of the book, and it tells me God wins. I may have struggles. I will have troubles. I may have disappointments, and I do and will have disappointments. But at the end of the day, God wins. Nothing the Sanballats of this world can do can take us away from that fact, that God is in fact going to win. So why does God allow guys like Sanballat to be such a thorn in Nehemiah's side? And I'll be honest with you, I wish I had a cut and dry, black and white answer that says here's the reason why. It's much the same question as why did God allow Job to be punished by Satan? I don't have that answer. I do not sit in God's place, and I certainly do not presume to understand God's ways or His means. And if I do, I'm probably subject to find myself in the same position Job did when he did that, where God says, where were you at the beginning of the earth? Where were you when I created heaven and earth? To be honest with you, my friends, there are times in our lives that do not make sense. There are times when we would question why God allows what He does. And I will tell you, there are times where it just flat out doesn't make sense. Here Nehemiah is just trying to rebuild the walls, trying to take and save a portion of his heritage. And yet everyone hates him for doing that. And oftentimes when you're doing God's work, Don't be surprised when people hate you. Don't be surprised when the world attacks you. Because to be honest with you, if you're doing God's work, they're not going to like it. The Lord of this world, which is Satan, is certainly going to attack you. He is certainly going to put as many Sanballats in your life as he can. And that, unfortunately, is a reality that we must face as Christians. That there will be people in our lives that are trying to stop us from doing what we're supposed to do, that will discourage us, that will cause us and laugh at us, and they will do all they can to undo. Which leads me to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 through 12, excuse me. For we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. What that's saying, very simply, and Paul has a way of putting things in a poetic, long verse, but what he is basically saying is, you're going to have troubles in this world. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. And if you were expecting something different, you might want to get over that pretty quick. Because to be honest with you, it is going to happen. But for all the disappointments, for all the discouragements that we have an assurance of God that says we will overcome. We will not be overwhelmed. We will be at the point where no man can stand between us and what God has planned. The funny thing about Sanballat was when he threatened Nehemiah and fear didn't work, he started flattering him and trying to get him to go to meetings. And I find it interesting that when you can't threaten someone, when you can't discourage someone, the next best thing to do is to take them and distract them. And I don't know about you, but in this new age world where everything is on a phone, a TV, or anything else, you can get distracted pretty fast. In fact, I think the attention span of the young people today, someone measured it and they said it's like 20% of what the normal adult should be. They don't have an attention span because they'll look at a phone and it'll flip and it'll go to something different, and what was there a moment ago is totally forgotten. Satan loves to distract. And Satan worked with Sanballat to distract Nehemiah. And he would call him and says, let's go have coffee. Let's go have a meeting. Let's go talk about this. Maybe I can be of assistance to you. I'm going to help you with that building of the wall. And Nehemiah's response was pretty quick. Sorry, but I don't have time. I'm doing what God called me to do, and I don't have time for coffee or a meeting. I don't have time for a distraction. I don't have time for you to take me away from what God has called me to do. To stay clear and focused on God, you must have a clear and concise view of what God has called you to do. If you do not have a clear focus on what God called you, this world can and will distract you. It will discourage you. It will take and threaten you. And if you do not have that clarity, you will not stay true to God's plan for you. If you do not have clarity, It is not going to be easy to stay away from the Sanballats of this world. And how do you get clarity? Very simple. If you look at this book that every one of us has on our shelf, I did a survey many years ago in a Sunday school class, an adult Sunday school class, and asked how many people have read their entire Bible. Not one of them answered yes. Now, my friends, if you haven't read your Bible, you can't tell me you know what God is saying. You must read the Bible. But that's not enough. You can read that entire Bible and still not have a clue what God is saying unless you apply what that Bible says and you pray to the God that says, hey, I'm a lost individual and I need help. Prayer is another aspect for clarity that you need. You cannot just pray twice a day and think that's going to be sufficient. You cannot just pray when it's convenient and find that you're going to be clarifying what God says to you. Clarity comes from an in-depth relationship with Jesus Christ. And you and I can sit here in church and go, yep, that's what I've heard before. I can't tell you how many sermons have told me I need a deep relationship with Jesus Christ. And then you walk away and the distractions of this world, the confusion of this world, the disappointments of this world will take you away from that relationship. Too many people desire what I call a milquetoast relationship with God. That milquetoast relationship is, I go to church, I feel good about myself, I pray once in a while, I do a few things here and there, and I call myself a good Christian. And I will tell you, what for some people that would be considered as God light. You've all heard of the different kind of diet sodas and diet things. It's now Diet Light. There's such a thing as God light. I want my fire insurance. I don't want to go to hell. Therefore, I'm going to believe in God. I'm going to do this and this and this so that I'm not going to hell. But I definitely don't want God telling me to go someplace and do something hard. I don't want Him saying, I am going to take you in a different direction than where you're at. And the truth of it is, my friends, a relationship with Jesus Christ begins with me asking for forgiveness, and it begins too with the words, not my will, Lord, but yours. I must be willing to say, whatever you have planned for me, I will do. I have these plans, I have this ideas, and I think I want to do this. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king. My friends, you don't get a much better job than that. The king doesn't drink anything but the best of wines. Your only risk is because he's the cupbearer, he tastes all of his food and all of his drink, so that if someone's trying to poison the king, Nehemiah gets it. But to be honest with you, that doesn't happen very often. So he is sitting in the palace, eating the very best of foods, drinking the very best of wines, and God says, I think I want you back in Jerusalem where there's a bunch of crumbly walls, and you're going to have to work hard, and people are going to tear you apart, try and discourage you, and do everything in their power to stop you. Now, if you're honest, if that was you, you might say, hey, Lord, you get the wrong guy. I'm a cupbearer. I'm not a builder. I don't need the headache and the hassle of going to Jerusalem. I'm doing this here, and I'm hopefully going to influence this king, and I'm going to hopefully do some great things. That could be what Nehemiah decided he wanted to say to God. Instead, Nehemiah says, if you ask me to, Lord, I go. And he did. And by the way, if you read the book of Nehemiah, you will read that he rebuilt the walls, and he reestablished the temple. And they actually sacrificed in the temple. He did what God had called him to do because he did not let the Sanballats of the world distract him. I'm here to tell you, you're going to face your Sanballats. There are plenty of them around, and I'm here to tell you they have infiltrated the church quite well. The church is dying today because we have failed to look and ask God, what is it you want us to do? And instead said, I've got a plan, God, and here's what you're going to bless. You do not get to tell God what we do. I have hopes and I have dreams for this church. I have plans for this church. But they're all prefaced with one pre-caveat, and that is, if this be your will. God's will be done in this church. Not because it has to be, but if we're going to remain a church, it must be. If we're going to stay committed to Christ, we're going to have to put Him first. We're going to have to quit listening to the crazy people that tell us other things, who tell us that we can't do it, that Christianity is no longer a valid thing in this world. I mean, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to go far out into that street before you're going to find someone that tells you God is dead. Christianity is dead. You're not going to go very far before you find someone who tells you you're a fool for believing what you believe. That Bible is meaningless garbage from several thousand years ago and has no meaning whatsoever today. You will not go far before you can find those voices. And that, my friends, is Sanballat speaking to you directly. For you and me, what it means to follow God is what Nehemiah did. He did not allow the distractions to take him away. He believed what God had spoken to him. He believed in the Bible. He believed in God. He listened to God alone and not the world. And because he did that, he succeeded. Now, if you're out there today and you're professing Jesus Christ, expect people to be critical of you. Expect people to threaten you. There are people dying this day somewhere because they profess Jesus Christ as Lord. Those people are all over the world dying because they refuse to deny Jesus Christ. It is always going to be that way in this world. There will always be opposition. There will always be Sanballats. But there will also be many a Sanballat that sits right next to you. Says, yeah, but you don't have to be radical about it. You can be a good Christian and still do. And the list goes on and on about all the sins that are now acceptable. The Sanballats will tell you that following God is more a feeling than it is a reality. As long as you feel good about what you're saying and doing, that's good. It has nothing to do with that Bible. It has nothing to do with what God says. It's just how you feel about it. And my friends, if you're going on your feelings alone, you're listening to a Sanballat. You cannot trust your feelings. You cannot trust the world. Satan will do whatever he can do to keep Christians from doing what God has called them to do. He will send Sanballats into everyone's life to distract, to threaten, to discourage. The question I leave you with today is, who are you going to listen to then? Sanballat or God? Because it's going to make a big difference in the way your life goes. Thank you.